Cheers, friends! Welcome to Eat, Read, Sleep, where we get together to vibe with books. This week we are going through a different book that we normally read. So we're deviating, and we did a book by Matthew McConaughey, Greenlights, a memoir of his life. And it was surprisingly such a delightful book. I'm really excited to talk to you, Tapas, about it today, and to all of our listeners and our viewers. So before we get into that, I did just want to say that usually we do a drinks and discussion segment. And so today with us, we are sipping on, what is this tea?
Peroni. It's Italian beer.
And how fitting is that? Because I think that Matthew McConaughey in his book did spend some time abroad, right? In Italy, was it?
Yeah, with his friend.
Where he was riding his motorcycle up and down the country. And so this is a nice touch for that one. All right, so let's jump into the book, Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah, I'm glad we're doing this discussion. We normally do summaries before we do the book discussions more in depth, right? But it's kind of hard to summarize a memoir. So I'm glad that we're doing this because it was a book that I wanted to discuss because when I listened to it, I didn't read the book. I listened to it on Audible, and I was like, I remember talking to him. I was like, because I'm not used to reading or listening to memoirs. It's my first actual autobiography that I've listened to,
right?
And I was like, are all of them like this? Because it is so good. I was surprised. I'm like, I actually want to discuss. I thought I was just going to listen to it and just like, okay, whatever. That was a good book, a good listen, and move on. But I listened to it, I'm like, there's a lot of good takeaways in this one. And
definitely. And it's funny because we actually didn't plan to read this book together, right? Because it does deviate from the other nonfiction books that we usually read. It's more self-help motivational books. But I did want to give a shout out to Juck's Books, Ryan from over there, who actually recommended this book, and he recommended to listen to it because Matthew McConaughey does do his own audible version of this. And when I read it, oh my goodness, it was just like, it gives this book a completely different element. And if you read this book, which I'm kind of torn because when you go through the book, it's a beautiful book. If you look at the pictures, the writings and notes, like there's a lot of his personal poems and stories that he puts in here. So you get a bit of his handwriting. So it's a very personal book. But then when you listen to it, it also brings an element to it that you're just like, wow, you have to have both. I feel like almost like you can't just read this without hearing him say some of these things. The other thing is because he is an actor, I feel like he read the book so beautifully. It wasn't read. He told you the story and you didn't feel like it was, some of the other Audible books people just read straight off, and this just, you really felt immersed in the book. Yeah.
And especially when you're listening to it, he throws in little quirks, where it's not in the book, but he just kind of tells the listener, oh, that's what I actually did.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, which kind of gives it that more personal, like you're talking to Matthew McConaughey or you're doing an interview with him and he's telling you about his book. It's kind of what it feels like.
Yeah.
You're right. I do listen to a lot of books on Audible, and a lot of them are just straightforward narrations, and that's about it. This one, I definitely felt like, it was so much fun reading, especially when you this Australian accent.
Yeah,
I loved it. I was like, so in my head, I still have his Australian accent in my head.
Matthew. It was so great. And because it was recommended to listen to, I actually listened to it, and I think it wasn't until recently that I found out that you had also listened to it as well. So then we're like, we have to discuss it then because I've been really dying to talk about, like you said, the lessons in this book. The title itself, Greenlights, is just so, it's just, what is the word? Like, it just makes you feel like
inspired.
Like everything in life will be okay. Just go after your dreams and do it. And it was just a great book. Because again, like you said, it's a autobiography, definitely hard to summarize. What I'd like to do is discuss the book and break it down into the major segments of the book. Let's start with his childhood, go through that, and then from his childhood go into more of his adolescence when he's in Australia that time, because I think that was a big lesson time for him when he did a study abroad, and then going into after that his pivotal shift from going to law school into film, and then that time of discovering himself in film, giving up rom-coms, and then shifting over to his family, wanting to be a father, and then finally finding his wife.
So I kind of want to give a quick, a background about my experience with McConaughey.
Okay.
So as you know, Kelly, I'm not the most vocal person, but there's some things that I'm very passionate that if it's...
Tell me it's rom-coms.
I cannot watch rom-coms, right?
No.
It's as somebody who loves films,
Yes.
like, those are the most cheesiest things in the world. Granted, there are some really good ones that I do enjoy, but I don't go on my way to look for rom-coms. Let me just say that. But so I always kind of thought of Matthew McConaughey as this rom-com guy. So I never actually was a big fan of his. I was like, oh, he's just like this shirtless guy. He has a really Texan accent, and he's a smooth talker, right? He's a playboy kind of thing. So I never could like really like him. I liked some of the more like, DiCaprio's more of the serious actors, right?
I see that.
Then I watched Interstellar. I watched Dallas Buyers Club, and I was like, oh, is this the same Matthew McConaughey? Like, what in the world happened? And I became a big fan of his. So that was my, going into it, I was like, okay, he's probably just gonna be like, oh yeah, my life is this grand, it's this lavish. So what I do, this is how many people I, had transaction with, whatever he calls it, right? Well, this person is a lot deeper than I thought.
Oh yeah.
Right. I do want to go, before we start into his life, go through what green lights means. What does a red light mean? What does yellow lights mean? Yep. So a red light is, you have three options at a red light. You either could concede, which is you wave a white flag. You pivot, you change the way you do things, or you persist, you push on, which is pretty much like wait, right? So it kind of as if you're driving a car, right? If you're at a red light, you're waiting for it to turn green. Either you can just say, oh, screw this, it's gonna take too long, I'm just gonna get out of my car and leave. That's always an option. You can either change direction, turn right, go some other way, or you can just wait for a green light to come through. And he always says, never concede, right? You don't want to just get out of your car and wave a white flag. You want to just wait, because there will always be green lights coming in the future. So just this red light. Red lights are there for you to reflect on, and they're important moments, because that's when you should be quiet. You should listen to what's happening around you and feel what's happening. And then when the green light comes, you can really see, okay, this is the green light. Yep. So I love the concept of it too.
Yeah. As do I. When we go into the idea of green lights, being an actor, being in the film industry, when you work on a film project, the term green light is also the indication that you can move forward with the project, right? So green lights is like, yes, okay, the script is good, we're ready to go, we're going to start filming. But it doesn't always guarantee that it's going to be a hit. It doesn't always guarantee that it's going to work out. It doesn't always guarantee that you're going to get the funding or whatever it is that you need. And so it's very symbolic of this, like, we can move forward, feel confident moving forward, but also know that there are going to be obstacles and challenges that we're going to have to navigate through and be okay with that.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the book.
Okay, so let's start with his childhood.
Yes.
Right, so Matthew McConaughey grows up in a very tough love family. He's got a mom and a dad who are very, he describes it almost abusive with each other, verbally and physically, but at the core of it, they love each other like mad, like crazy. Like, it's a very unorthodox, like very unnatural type of love. They were divorced 2 times, married 3 times. Yep. And so he uses this as this foundation for the love that he wants to have in his life when he grows up, that it's just this like strong against all odds, like they can go through everything.
His parents were very, very important characters in his life, as well as very interesting characters. Because mom grew up in a town, what was it called? Altoona. And she didn't want to, and she would tell people she's from somewhere else, because she's like, who would ever tell somebody that she's from Altoona? Yeah. And so she's a lot around perception, right? And then his dad was pretty much like a blue collar worker, right? He works really hard. He expects a lot from his sons. They have a very interesting relationship. He has a story in there where like they got into a fight because his mom picked a fight with him. They start going at it. She gets a knife and like she punches his dad in the nose, breaks his nose. He gets a red ketchup bottle, starts spraying ketchup at her, and they're like going at it, just completely just want to kill each other. And all of a sudden they just hug it out, and then
they start making love right in
the middle of the kitchen floor with the kids all there. Just like, what? So that's the kind of childhood he had.
Yeah.
So there was definitely a lot of love there in a very different way.
Yeah.
I guess.
I think what really gave me not inspiration, but there was something here that I was like, wow, there's something special about Matthew McConaughey, because he talks about his parents and he talks about the tough love. He talks about how he was beaten. He talks about how his dad like never gave him physical, emotional love, and how he had to prove himself to his dad. And it wasn't a rite of passage until he like did something manly and stood up to his dad. I think a lot of times growing up, if you grow up in that environment, you can either be broken down, you can either feel like you don't have enough love. And he just kind of took it as a challenge. Like, I know my parents love me, and I'm going to prove to them that I love them. And it's very, I don't know, it's a very unique way of looking at things.
Yeah, you know, especially with his dad, the way that you would prove that you would prove his love, or you would prove that you're a man, is pretty much you had to just get into a physical fight with him.
Yeah.
Like his older brother got into a fight, and he took a 2x4 and just smacked his dad, knocked him out completely. And his dad woke up, was like, "I'm so proud of you, my son." and then at that point they were equals, right?
Yes.
And
exactly.
and McConaughey and Matthew had a very similar experience later on in life, where he stood up to his dad finally, and they
at the bar, right?
At the bar, and they end up actually becoming equals.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting thing, because you're right. A lot of kids at that moment, they might just think that, oh, my family is like just
dysfunctional, abusive
family. And he looked at it in a very different, because I think at the core of it, he knew his family stood for love. Like they loved each other so much.
Yeah.
And so he knew that was never a question. Does my family love me? It's more about like, how do I prove myself to them too?
Yeah, it goes to show that love can be shown in many different ways.
Yes.
I just read something recently, like sometimes when someone loves you, they don't always say "I love you." They say things like, "How are you today? Did you eat today?
Sure.
How do you feel?" And people just express love in very different ways. And McConaughey is really intuitive with that. Like he just picks it up, and he doesn't need to feel. What I appreciate about that is that his confidence is so great that he doesn't need to feel validated in that way. He just knows, and then he just forges forward with it.
Yeah, so definitely a very interesting childhood that he had growing up.
Yeah.
And then after that,
going through, high school, no surprise, Matthew McConaughey is like
the girls.
Down with the girls, and homecoming king and prom
I like what he
king.
said. He dated the prettiest girl in his school and the other high school.
Yes.
I was like, wow.
He paints this picture of him sitting in front of his, his truck, like all cool. There was one thing that stuck out with that is where he talks about how he thought he was so cool. He sold his truck and then went and bought this like fancy sports car. And then after that, he realized that, the girls weren't coming to him anymore. And that was kind of his first like red light in life, where it was like, he gave up who he truly was, his personality. He went for the what he thought, the perception, what he thought people wanted, and it ended up not being authentic to him. And so he got his truck back. He realized who he was, and he stuck to that. And then all the girls came back to him as well. So he goes through high school, and then after high school, he applies to go study abroad. He spends a year. He does his year contract and goes to Australia, where he thinks he's going to spend this year in Sydney, like by the beaches in the city, like living this great Australian life. Come to find out, he stays with the Dooleys. I was going to say Dudleys. The Dooleys. And they're nowhere near Sydney, right? They completely misled him this entire time when they were corresponding before he actually went to Australia. Yeah. This family picks him up at the airport, and then they drive like 8 hours out of the city to this tiny little town.
Yeah. I love that story because along the way, right, the person that's sponsoring him, one of the Mr. Dooley, we'll call him, he's kind of telling him, we're just next town over. We're not in Sydney, we're next town over. So they go next town over, and Matthew's like, oh yeah, this is a beautiful town. There's a beach. Oh, it's going to be awesome. He's like, oh, this is too progressive for us. We're going to go next town over. And he keeps doing that over and over, next town, until he says, we reached the last town in the freeway at population 300. And it's like, all right, Matthew, this is our place. And it's like this middle of nowhere house.
Yes.
I mean, you just it just screams like one of these horror movies, right? and he just like, and you can tell Matthew just had this tone like, yeah, my life is about to change with this because definitely for him that was red light. He could tell something was coming on, but it was also a very important time, which is why he always says, you have to use red lights as a way to think and progress.
He turned this to a green light and used this time. I thought it was very inspiring to read about someone so young. I mean, I would say at that time he was probably 18, 19. Relatively in life, I would say immature at that age in terms of life experiences. He was able to take this time that was very miserable because this family ended up being very controlling and very almost mean to him. And they tried to control a lot of the aspect of his life, down to his bedtime and what, everything. And so in this time, he decided that he was going to make some drastic life changes and be able to learn how to self-reflect.
Yes.
Right. So he went vegetarian, he became abstinent, he got a job, and he just did everything he could to learn about himself. And he journaled and he wrote stories and he wrote letters and he did all these things. And the year that started off as this horror story that is a complete 180 from what he expected it to be. I think that's what is, even for me, I was like, dang, like that sucks. You expected this like great grand year and it ended up being like not even close to what you thought it was going to be. That would, I think, break a lot of people.
It would.
Expectations is something in life that, that really controls your reaction and how you feel. And so he didn't allow his expectations to deter him. And if anything, that year became one of the most pivotal years of his life.
Yeah, he said it was his year of isolation, right? So where he was able to self-reflect a lot. I mean, I think he even said he would change his career. He wanted to become a monk. He wanted to go and free Nelson Mandela. Like that was his pivot that he went into.
Yeah.
Because he was so controlled by that family. I mean, to the point where they wouldn't let him eat certain things. They wouldn't let him root for the USA team when the Olympics were on. Like all this kind of stuff was happening.
They made him call them mom and
dad, and that was his breaking point, right? He said, like, I'm not gonna call you mom and dad. Like, I'll do a lot of things and I'll suck it up, but you are not my mom and dad. And he like stood by that, and that was a big thing that he like finally stepped. Like he stood his ground for that one. Yeah. It's so true because I think a lot of times he looked back and he said, back home I was this popular kid. I had a truck. I got all these girls, and now I'm just this vegetarian who runs 2 miles every single day, and I'm trying to free Nelson Mandela. Like the whole contrast changed. But again, he waited out and he saw green lights, and then at the end, he finally was able to separate from them. He went to a friend's house and they sponsored him instead, and they're just like, and then the friend was like, I can't believe you were with the Doolies. And it's like, they were bad. It's like, yeah, and everyone knows they're terrible. And they're like, why did you let me do it?
And that was the other thing. During this whole time, he never complained about it. He never told anyone else that this family is crazy. He just stuck with it. Yeah. And I think that's very admirable.
Yeah.
So then he comes home and he spends his, now he's going to law school, right? So he goes to law school, decides, not cut out for it. This isn't what I want. And then he makes this big decision. His friend says, why don't you try film school? And he's so scared to tell his dad, right? Like that was the one thing he's like, I need to have my family's blessing on this. I just don't know how I'm going to do it.
That phone call that he had with his dad, right? One that he was really nervous about because he doesn't know how his dad's going to react to this. His dad's spending $9,000 a year to pay for this school.
Yep.
And going into it, he's just sweating, and he's like, okay, I'm going to call him after dinner so that way he's in a good mood. Maybe mom and dad haven't fought yet. Like all this stuff is going on. And he ends up telling him the news. And there's like this 5 seconds of silence, which Matthew McConaughey said was the most nerve-wracking thing that he had ever felt.
Yep.
And what did his dad say?
He says, silence. After 5 seconds, his dad says, well, don't half-ass it.
Yes.
He says, of all the things my dad could have said, of all the reactions he could have had, don't half-ass it were the last words I expected to hear, and the best words he could have ever said to me. With those words, he not only gave me his blessing and consent, he gave me his approval and validation. That was his green light.
I think that was one of the things when I listened to it, I was just like, it kind of made me self-reflect so much on how much power and confidence parents can give to their kids.
Oh, yes.
Right? I think a lot of times kids have that fear because they feel like if I tell my parents something and I'm going to deviate from this path, that they're going to disown me, they're going to be disappointed by me.
Disappointed is the big one.
That's the big one, right? And I felt like he went through that phase, but when his dad told him don't half-ass it, like imagine the confidence builder. Like he could, in his mind from then on, there is no failure because his dad was 100% behind him. Like that is such a freeing thing for a child. And so it made me self-reflect that with my daughter, like I want to make sure that I am going to be there 100% to support her. If she is truly passionate, I'll probably will say the same thing, sweetheart, do not half-ass it. If this is what you want to do it, go for it 100%. I will always love you.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
that was something that made me self-reflect a lot.
Yeah. And we've talked about that in previous books as well, right? Like the expectations that we have of our children is not fair for our children at all. Like we don't own our kids. We're here to help guide and support them. And I think a lot of parents take it to that ownership where this is my child. It's my responsibility to make sure they get a good education. They make a lot of money. They're supported in life. But your own personal goals are not the same goals that your children have. And imagine what the film industry or this world would be like if Matthew McConaughey's dad said, no, you can't do that. Where would we be? Would McConaughey even pursue it? Would he pursue it full-heartedly? Maybe he would pursue it, but he wouldn't have that confidence to be the type of actor that he is today. So that allowing your child to thrive in who they truly are and follow their heart, I think it's the green light that we all need, right? Yeah. And then also to be that parent that can provide that gives you the green light to know that you're just loving your child wholeheartedly. I think in this world there's a lot of that old mentality of tough love is the best way to give love, and through the years and research and how many people need therapy these days, it's very evident that tough love is not the right way to go.
Yes.
And I hear a lot of people say, well, this is how I grew up and I turned out fine. And I'm just like, you're not fine.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
You think that you are, but you're really not. And then you turn around and you do the same to your children. Your children are going to grow up needing therapy. And we're in this world now where therapy is not just okay, but it should be expected. I think everyone, whether or not you're happy or not, should go through therapy because you need that outlet to talk and express, because there's too much going on in this world. There's too much internal and external angst and all of that. And if we can all be open and supportive of each other instead of thinking that we got to put up this tough facade, we got to like just truck through it. Like it's, the old books of like fearlessness and grit and all of that, like even the concept of like multitasking and doing all these things, it's not what is, that's not the direction that we're going towards anymore. All right, so let's talk about film school.
Yes.
The one thing about film school that really stuck out with me and was just so Matthew and gave me kind of like permission to live my life. Not that I needed it, but it was almost like a validation in a way, where he goes to film school, but he doesn't actually attend film school, right? No. He misses all these classes, and his professors are like, no, you're missing exams, you're all of this stuff, you have to be here X percent of time. And he's like, well, professor, I'm going to these auditions, I'm getting real life experiences. Like what I'm actually doing is way more than what I'm actually learning in school. No offense to you. So let me make you this deal. I continue doing my thing. I'll show up for these exams. Just give me a C across the board and we'll be good. Yeah. Because he knew and he realized that the value of him not being in school and getting his real life experiences were so much more powerful than actually sitting in the class and learning them, but not applying them.
Yeah. All right. So after film school, where does he go off to next?
He goes to, so he starts working in the industry, right? He meets this director or this producer, Don Phillips, right? Producer Don Phillips. And I just love all the people that he meets in the stories because they're very serendipitous. He's just like randomly meeting them, and then he just, because of who he is, because of how open he is, and he talks throughout the whole book about all of these celestial things and these signs in life. I think we skipped a couple of parts where he talks about his wet dreams.
Yes.
Right. So he has these wet dreams. Yes, they are exactly what you think they are, but they're so vivid, and they tell him that he needs to like go to Africa, or you need to find this river, you need to do these things. And most of us, when we have these crazy wild dreams, it's like we wake up and we're like, well, that's crazy. Right? And then you kind of sit in those emotions for a while, but he actually does something about them. He actually goes to Africa. He actually goes to live with these tribes, and he learns their culture. He actually goes to find this river in the Andes and the Amazon, and it's just, he is so full of life in chasing his dreams, and yes, he is privileged in a way that he can, but also not, right? Because at the time that he did this, it's not like he was making a ton of money. He was couch surfing. He was just figuring how to get there. He's buying one-way ticket and trying to figure it out as he goes. So he's a nomad in his own way. and he just lives his life. And I feel like when you follow your dreams like that with no inhibition, the universe gives you, again, we go back to the alchemist a lot, the universe conspires to give you all your dreams and everything that you hope for. And he's like living proof of this.
Yeah. One thing that screams whenever I think of Matthew McConaughey after this is authenticity. He's a very authentic person to himself. Like he's not like, even when you met the producer, he said the producer liked two things. He liked golf and like vodka. He's like, that's me. So I can definitely. So they definitely bonded over that.
Yeah.
Because he wasn't trying to be fake. He was trying to like fake his fake.
He wasn't even trying to say I'm an actor.
No,
right? He was just trying to get to know this guy.
And that's how he ended up landing his first like official role, which was this character in it was like it's supposed to be a 3-minute thing that he was being that's it.
That he did not prepare for.
He did not prepare for. He had no sort of preparation at all, and he ended up just knocking it out with the producer. And the producer actually said like, hey, like, do you want to be in more scenes? And he's like, yeah, I would love to. And so he ended up actually being in more scenes after that, which is amazing.
Yeah.
So you can tell that because he got into the mindset of the character, because that's what he always wanted to do. He wanted to know. He became the character. So the producer asked him, like, what do you think this character would do? Would he want to actually date this girl? Like, why wouldn't he? Like, this character is super free. And that's the difference I think a lot of actors lack sometimes, is that they don't become the character. There's a lot of people.
Say that.
I mean, in terms of like, there's definitely some actors who do a good job and they become that character. And you can tell they own it. Like, I think of Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, right? He owned that character, right? I'm not gonna call out the ones that I think that didn't own it. And then even like someone like Daniel Day-Lewis.
I think I will counter that, and I will say that to actors' defenses, I think that they all do that, because that is what acting is, right? You need to be in that mindset. Now, how good they are at it and how skillful they are, that's a different story. But I think they all at least try to do that. And the extreme ones, extreme stories, you can really see it show on the screen. Yeah. And Matthew McConaughey is one of those actors. And I think we talked about it earlier. It is not necessarily unfortunate, because for me, I love rom-coms. Okay? That's like totally my vibe. So when I pick out a rom-com, I'm looking for Matthew McConaughey, I'm looking for J-Lo, I'm looking for Jennifer Aniston. So like, you know, that fits the mold of what I'm looking for. But then a lot of people, I think that when they look at that, they only associate him with that. And I think that we can lead into our next topic, where he starts making all of these movies. He starts being so successful. He gets to a point where he says, I'm making so much money, but I am not truly who I am and what I want to be. And so he makes a decision that he's no longer going to do any rom-com movies, right? And so when he makes this decision, another like shit hits the fan, where he stops getting any offers, because all of the industry knows now, well, Matthew's not going to do it. And because that's all they really know him for, he doesn't get any other offers. So then he goes through this dark time in his life where he's like, did I make a mistake? Should I go back to rom-com? Should I, like, what am I going to do? And what does he do?
Well, he sticks to his ground, right? He stays there. He says, I'm not gonna half-ass it. This is what I want to do. This is what my pathway is.
He paints his own story.
Yes.
He says he creates this thing called the reconnaissance.
Well, that was after he made the film that kind of changed it all.
Yeah, right. But leading up to that, he's just like, this is what people see me as. It's very easy for a regular person to be like, okay, well, this is the mold that I fit, and this is what I should continue doing, and this is how I make money. He gets this rom-com script, and they really want him badly. At first, it's like $3 million. He's like, nope. And then 6 million, nope. And then it goes up to like, what, 20 million? Something absurd. If he only did this movie for like 3 weeks, he would have made like $20 million. And he's like, I'm not doing it. I'm going to stand firm to my ground. And when that happened, the industry started seeing him a little bit more seriously. And then he created what he wanted others to see. And it took time. I think that's what in real life, a lot of people get setbacks, because it's like, they don't sit there and wait at that red light long enough. They get out of the car and they leave because it's too hard.
It took 2 years before he got another role that he was happy with. But I think the big thing for him that kind of made him persist on not going back to it was he found Camilla, right? Like the love of his life.
Enter
it's
Camilla.
A very beautiful interaction about how they met. I'm not going to spoil
another
it.
serendipitous.
Yes, very much like, and you can tell he's madly in love with this person, right? And she was the one that told him, like, we're going to do this. We're going to do this 100%. I don't want you to, tell me later on that you can change your mind. I'm with you. No matter what happens, we're going to get through this. So like having that person in your life that's constantly going to cheer you on, say, you know what? I get what you're going through because this is what's happening and I'm going to support you 100%.
Yeah.
That, again, it's kind of like his dad, where his dad gave him the confidence. You have that confidence. I'm like, yes, I'm going to wait it out. Granted, he is a very popular actor. He made millions of dollars, so he definitely has a position of privilege in terms of he can wait out those 2 years for something to come up, or he can just go back and do something else if he needs to. But nonetheless, he stuck to it.
Yeah.
And I think the role that changed him was The Lincoln Lawyer. I think that was a book, that was a movie that came out that where he took on a much more serious, a very dramatic role, which was very different from what he had before. Yeah. In between that, he also had another wet dream where he going to the I think he went to Brazil, one of the wet dreams, and then he realized he had the same wet dream later on again, and that was actually in Africa, and he had his whole revelation too. So I mean, again, guys, as you guys are reading through it, you just realize he really listens to his intuition. Yes. He listens to what's happening around him. He listens to his environment, and he didn't just let it just be like, oh, that's weird, and just move on. Yes. It's like something somewhere is telling me I have to do something, and he's willing to drop everything and go.
He's so one with nature. It's very wild, and he's very open in this book about like all of the drugs he's done and all of that. I remember that story when he was in Austin in his home and he was dancing naked with the bongos and the cops come in and he's like high as a kite and just like dancing naked, got arrested, and he's explaining to us in his mind how he thought he could jump and do like a parkour off and like get out of the handcuffs. Totally it's like so like he's very true and real, and there's nothing in here I feel like that really holds back. I was hoping there was a bit more about the J-Lo romance in here, but there wasn't. So my rom-com fellows.
Was that a thing? Is there like a rumor about that?
Maybe I'm making it up in my head then. I think I just wanted to hear more about his time working with J-Lo.
Kalina is a very big J-Lo fan.
I'm a huge J-Lo fan, a huge rom-com, one of those like super girly girls. But he skims through a lot of his rom-com time in general.
He does.
And I think that's definitely done on purpose. Yes, he finds Camilla, and the way he just explains how he saw her the first time, it's definitely like love at first sight. And then he starts like just the strong woman. He wants to be better for her, and then he realizes that they start a family. They do it the non-traditional way where they have a child first together, and he's like, I'm not going to marry until I feel like I absolutely really have to, and then he gets to a point where he's like, I think he has a dream. That,
and I think also his 3-year-old son asked him like, why aren't you married with mommy? Like I have McConaughey as my last name, you have McConaughey, why is mommy Alves? And he's like, well, it's because I'm not really quite there yet. And he's like, I will only marry somebody when I need to get married,
not because I have to.
Not because I have to, because he's not very conformative that way.
Yeah.
But that was a really cool story too, because just the way how he went through the whole process of it, and then
he never has done it. It seems like in his book, he's never done anything that he was supposed to.
Right.
He did everything the way. And I really like it's funny. There's so many takeaways from this book, but the one thing that sticks out the very top of my mind is his dad saying, in life, you can break rules as long as you don't get caught.
Yes.
And I feel like that's how McConaughey lives his life. I feel like that's what I need for me to live my life, because not because I want to do anything bad, but because there's so many guardrails and so many rules and expectations on society of what you should and should not do. And I feel like when you and I broke free of what we were supposed to do in life and started Eat, Read, Sleep and what we're going to be our next venture, we weren't supposed to. That was breaking the rules, and we weren't supposed to do that. And we got a lot of like questionable, like, well, what are you going to do for money, or what are you, And when you realize that rules are meant to be broken, it allows you to live life and look at life from a completely different lens. And I feel like I'm chasing my green lights.
Yes, I agree. And I think the book he has a lot of things. He has a lot of great quotes in there. He has a lot of great
What's your favorite one?
So there's two that he says. The one that I want to get tattooed on myself, that I love the most, I remind myself every single day, and I told you this, is less impressed, more involved. And that was because he was talking about when he was watching movies, when he was learning to become an actor. He said a lot of people were just impressed especially the peers who were impressed with what's happening around them, but they didn't want to do the work. They didn't want to actually get in there, dig deep, and actually learn.
Yeah.
They were just impressed. And I think that's where I was myself before I read that line. Because that was one of those lines I was listening. I was on my evening walk, and I heard that in the audiobook, and I paused. I'm like, whoa, that was huge. Because I'm definitely one of those people that would look at a movie or look at a YouTube video. I'm like, that was amazing. I can't believe they did that. That's so cool. And I never actually would get involved in how to learn how to do that.
Yes.
And now I'm actually I would look at something. I'm like, okay, let me try to do that. And so I would try myself to do something similar to that. And again, that's just because I'm trying to be less impressed and more involved.
Be a part of it.
And I think a lot of times that also carries on to social media too. Because people live on Instagram, they're impressed by what other people are doing, but they're not getting involved in trying to do something that would also give them the same feeling. Yeah. So I think that was also really important.
It reminds me of something that I saw recently on Instagram, and it was, along the lines of, if you want to be a billionaire or a millionaire, you have to actually become not be a billionaire, but you have to become the type of person that could become a billionaire. Yes. And a lot of people don't understand that if you want something, you actually have to change who you are.
Yeah.
And not in a bad way of changing altogether, but you either have to learn something new, you have to put yourself in a different uncomfortable situation, you have to do something that you normally would not do, because a lot of people, what they do is they sit and they like, oh, I hope and I wish I could do that, or I hope one day I can do this. That never is going to happen. Who you are is who you are in this environment. But if you want to be a successful person doing this, or if you want to be a millionaire doing this, you got to change up everything so that your life lives and breathes that end goal.
It's so true, because another book, The Almanac by Naval, he kind of about like you said, you have to live the life of a millionaire. Like if you want to become that person, you have to be okay with what that person is. Right?
Yes.
So some millionaires and some billionaires are like amazing people. They help with charities. They're very altruistic, right? Yeah. But some millionaires and some billionaires that you admire are also very ruthless. So like that also would mean that, are you willing to be that ruthless with people in order to get your million? Yeah. Right. Sometimes that's the thing that I think people miss out on. Yes. They just look at the success, they look at the money, and they're just like
the end goal without thinking of all the work that needs to get there, and realize that you don't just need to do the work, you have to be the work. Yes. And that's a whole life's change.
Yeah. It's the 60 hours a week. It's the nonstop, working at night, waking up early in the morning, all that kind of that's the involvement you have to be in.
And what's interesting is that they spend more time doing things like shortcuts. Like they'll do things like, like risky investments and Bitcoin and all. And then they have all of these endeavors of all these things I'm doing to make a ton of money, but it's cheap shortcuts that don't really add up to much more.
And unfortunately, again, that's the kind of people look at that, they put that, image of somebody's successful. I want to be this person, this is what I'm going to do. Yeah. But what actually is happening behind the scenes is very different. Yeah. And that's why I appreciate, going back to Matthew McConaughey, he has always just been, this is just who I am. Yeah. Like he is this very confident person. He listens to himself. He doesn't try to BS you out of into anything. And he's just, even to the point where he signed with Lincoln. He actually liked Lincoln as a car company. He agrees with them. Yes. He's very so it's not just he's selling you a product just because he made him money. Yeah. He actually does support the company. Yeah. So that's why I love him, because he's a very authentic person. Yeah.
The way that he ends the book, I just really appreciate this book. At the end, he actually, he signs it. There's a lot of his handwriting through. So when he signs it, to me, and there's like this little PS part, I just felt like it was a letter just written to me, and it was just personal. Like it just felt like such a connection with him. But what I really loved is in his closing, he wrote, "My 20s and 30s were contradictory decades. These were years where he eliminated conditions and truths that went against his grain. It was a time when I was often more concerned with not running red lights than I was with investing in red lights. He just survived." And I look back, and we talked about that, like our 20s and 30s were like really just trying to figure out who the hell we were, what we're going to do, how we're going to live this life, because you go from, college and grad school to career to family to kids, and it's just like, what the heck is all this? Yeah. And then he says that his 40s was a much more affirming decade, years when I started to play offense with truths that I had learned, I not only cruised through more green lights because I had eliminated more red and yellow ones, but a time that I created more green lights to travel through, a time when green lights beamed brighter because I gave them more power to shine. And, you know, you and I always talk about our 40s being like, oh, we can't wait till we're 40s, right? Like all of our friends now are turning 40 and they're like, oh man. And I'm just like, I can't wait to turn 40, right? Exactly. Because for me, it's almost like this milestone of like, yes, we've crossed this threshold. We've done all of this like soul searching. And obviously you still have to have soul searching. You still have to recalibrate and find yourself and do the self-assessment check-in often. But I just feel like when you're in your 40s, it's almost as indicative of like, man, we've ran all these red lights. We kind of know how to cruise now. We know how to see when the good red lights are. We know when the red lights are coming. We know how to time it. So the red lights come. We're not like speeding through anymore. And it's just like, it's so cool to see that he went through all of this. And then when he's in his 50s, he said, you know what? I've seen all my life. I know all this. I'm going to grab all of my journals, everything, and I'm going to go hide away in the desert. And he just sits and writes this magnificent book. And this is what it is. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh man, I don't have anything to look back and write on for my life.
We start journaling.
I don't remember to document anything. How many times have we talked about journaling and I still have not done it yet, right? This is kind of like our journaling in a way here. But overall, I really, really enjoy this book so much more than I thought. This book has been on my TBR to be read for a very long time. I had this hard copy for a couple of years now, but I actually never picked it up until it was recommended from a friend. And then I listened to it, and now I can't wait to go back to actually read it because I think it just looks like it's something that I want to immerse myself in, just looking at his poems and his stories. And
it's so true. I think I definitely want to read it next time too.
So if you're not a Matthew McConaughey fan, I would say read this book. You will learn how to respect, if not him, his ways. And if you like Matthew McConaughey, you will leave loving Matthew McConaughey. Now, I will say, our friend Ryan that recommended this book, he's like, it does get a bit repetitive when McConaughey's yelling like, green lights, prescription, and like all of that through the book. I actually enjoyed it. I think it was fun. I don't think that it gets too much. I think it sticks with the theme, and it's very fitting.
Yeah, especially when you're listening and he goes, prescription, you kind of know, okay, I got to pay attention. There's some kind of gem happening here, right? So, again, just like with myself, highly recommend the book. I kind of question, should I be reading more memoirs? Because if it's like this, it's very exciting because it's not just like a book about himself. There's a lot of good life takeaways that can be applied to anybody. So,
this is definitely a motivational self-help book in a way. All right, so cheers to Matthew McConaughey for composing this piece of art for us. And I love that we both kind of picked it up without even knowing, right? Like it wasn't a intended ERS book, but definitely one that has been impactful and good for us to talk through. So cheers, my friend, and cheers to all of our listeners and viewers. Thanks for sitting with us on the Orange Couch today and discussing Greenlights by Matthew McConaughey.
Bye, guys.
Take care, guys. Bye.